Get out of bed and just get to vote. Grab your neighbor, grab everybody. Tomorrow is the day that each and every one of you is going to cast the most important vote of your entire life.
So let's get everybody out to vote. Let's show all of the media class and the political class that we've got a different plan in mind.
And then there were two. The stakes are high for Nikki Haley as she needs a win in New Hampshire in her head-to-head battle against former President Donald Trump. Thank you for joining us this hour for America's Vote 2024, the New Hampshire primaries. New Hampshire native and national political reporter for The Hill, Kate Martell, is on the ground. Kate, it's great to see you. A big theme that's been discussed in the New Hampshire primary is the large contingent of independent and moderate voters. Those folks tend to break for Nikki Haley. Are you hearing from any of those types of voters on the ground?
Yes, Michael, I'm hearing from a lot of independents. I've been following Nikki Haley around for the past few days and looking for New Hampshire voters that I could talk to. And most of the people that I talked to are actually registered independents who just very much dislike former President Trump and, are looking for the best way that they can knock him off the podium. All of these voters that I've been talking to have been gravitating towards Nikki Haley. I've noticed theme I'm noticing is a lot of these independents were actually waiting to get closer to the primary before they would decide who they wanted to vote for because they wanted to know how they could best use their vote. What's interesting about the New Hampshire primary is that both independents and undeclared voters are allowed to participate. It's not a closed primary where only Republicans are allowed to vote in the Republican primary. And that actually makes a pretty big difference, especially considering, if you look at New Hampshire's political makeup, if you compare it to Iowa, it's much more politically moderate. It's a lot less evangelical. It's a lot more libertarian leaning and a lot more, when you add all of that up, there are a lot of independent voters in New Hampshire that would look at somebody like Nikki Haley as the candidate they would choose.
Kate, I want to jump off something that you just said that was interesting, that a lot of voters have been waiting to actually decide who they're going to support because they want to figure out where their vote is best kept. Have you spoken to a lot of undecided voters? Because I think a big question right now is, will the polls be wrong? And will Nikki Haley do better than the polls are showing? Are you hearing from a lot of undecided voters who are still weighing their options?
Yes, Meg, I actually have heard from there, particularly comes to mind at a Nikki Haley event. I talked to one man from Nashua, New Hampshire, who is a lifelong Democrat, and he said that because he's looking at President Biden's age, and he thinks that he did what he needed to do in 4 years and wants someone new, really dislikes former President Trump, and came out on this past Sunday to see Nikki Haley decide if he wanted to support her. He came away from that event a Nikki Haley supporter because he liked what she had to say.
So let's stick on the topic of Nikki Haley, because New Hampshire's really become an expectations game for her, right? At first, her team was optimistic, some folks saying that they would notch a win in the Granite State. Now they're couching that a bit, sort of saying that a win will look like a strong second-place finish, getting into Donald Trump's lead. What margin does Nikki Haley have to see tonight to call New Hampshire a win?
It's a good question. And as far as margins, what I'm hearing is that a lot of people are expecting former President Trump to win by double-digit margins. And if that happens, I think that's what is going to be hard for Nikki Haley as we head into the next major contest of South Carolina. That being said, I think also she is the former state governor of the state, and I think she probably will stick it out. As far as the polling goes, nearly every poll has former President Trump leading by a pretty big margin. So it would be very unlikely for her to win the primary. And like you were saying, I think the campaign has kind of recalibrated what it means to win tonight in New Hampshire, that it might not necessarily be a first place win, but for her to come in a close second place, and I would argue if it's in single digits, she would probably consider that a win. And in heading into South Carolina, she's going to continue the momentum and continue to fuel her campaign as being the only Trump alternative. And, I think she's hoping that, former Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has only been out of the race for a few days. And now that it truly is a one-on-one campaign, that she's hoping she can kind of, find the momentum from that. And,
right.
As a lot more Republicans figure out they don't want to support Trump, she's the only natural person they can support.
Right. Recalibrating, I think, is a good word to use for this situation. But, Kate, I was particularly excited to talk to you because you're a New Hampshire native. You've covered 5 of these primaries. Tell me, what's the energy like on the ground right now compared to the other contests that you've covered?
Michael, the energy is unfortunately pretty low right now.
Really?
Enthusiasm is low. I'm at the DoubleTree Hotel in Manchester, and traditionally the lobby of this hotel has always been the major media hub. That's where you'd find GOP strategists and Democratic strategists. You'd find all national media, candidates come by. And honestly, I was here last night. It was pretty dead. That used to be a pretty political who's who party scene. And I've been talking to a lot of voters that are just not excited. There's been the constant political chaos. They feel that we have 2 incumbents. President Biden isn't even running his campaign in the state despite the write-in campaign. And former President Trump is so likely to win that I think New Hampshire feels that they don't matter as much as they have in the past. And because former President Trump has never really done retail-style politics, those are all those diner visits, brewery visits, school visits, and that kind of just leaves Nikki Haley as the only candidate who has a full campaign schedule. And then that means I've been going to a lot of these campaign events, and they are completely swarmed with media, that you'll see one journalist go up to try to find a New Hampshire voter, and instead they happen to find another journalist because these events are completely packed.
There's a national interest in the race, but maybe the local interest is a little lower than usual. That's funny. Kate, tapping back into your institutional knowledge of the state, what issues are most important to New Hampshire voters? Just from you knowing growing up in the area, but also hearing from folks that you're talking to.
Yeah, I'd say that the economy has always been a big issue for New Hampshire. The license plate even says live free or die, that New Hampshire voters tend to be pretty libertarian leaning, that they might be pretty socially moderate, socially liberal even, but they don't like government interference. They want as few laws as possible. That's always, I think, what's motivated a lot of New Hampshire voters. And then, from voters that I've been talking to, particularly in the past week, the economy keeps coming up over and over. I actually talked to one couple at the Trump rally over the weekend, and they said that the reason that they're supporting former President Trump is because during the Trump administration, they could afford to go on vacations, that they felt very financially comfortable. They've been looking at inflation over the past few years, and they told me that they're having a really hard time now paying their utility bills. And that's why they said they've decided that they're supporting Trump, because they want to go back to that era. And that anecdote has really stuck with me because, inflation has hit the United States pretty hard in the past few years. And a lot of people in New Hampshire are talking to me, and they just keep saying, I want something different. I want something to change because I'm having a hard time paying my bills. And that, is not the way that they have known the state, especially because New Hampshire does have a fairly low cost of living compared to some other states, particularly in New England.
We're all reminded of the famous quote, "It's the economy, stupid," which seems to still ring true today. But I want to talk about another issue. I found this was interesting. There was a recent USA Today, Boston Globe, Suffolk University poll conducted earlier this month in New Hampshire, and it found that the most important issue facing the country today, according to these New Hampshire voters, was the future of American democracy. 29.5% of likely voters in the state said that, followed by immigration and border security at 23.7%. Who does that benefit? Who does that statistic affect more? Because, of course, we're dealing with former President Trump, who was in office during the January 6th riot, who's now undergoing these investigations. We also talk about from the Democratic side. This has been something that President Biden and his team has really been stressing, the future of democracy. So talk about the importance of that issue in the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah, how interesting is the future of democracy as being the top respondent? You know, it's a pretty philosophical answer, particularly when you look at what's going on with the border and what's going on with the economy and all these other issues. That it's so notable to me that that is what a lot of New Hampshire voters are looking towards when they're voting. And, you know, you can easily say that it does benefit President Biden. I think that's the answer, the easy answer here, because, you know, a lot of when you just talk about the future of democracy, a lot of that's tied into the events on January 6th, 2021. And, you know, and people I've been talking to, when they're talking about worrying about the country, they're worried about what's been happening and, you know, all the political chaos that they haven't been able to escape for the past decade. So I think it does definitely benefit Democrats, even if you break down into that poll by party, that a lot more Democrats feel that way than, you know, even the voter bloc as a whole. But you can also, I think, argue that voters who have been seeing the past 4 years and are unhappy with the Biden administration, that also they want something new. So I think the future of democracy can tie in there. I think what's also really interesting, though, is the border security, that is the second most important issue to New Hampshire voters. New Hampshire is nowhere near the U.S.-Mexico border, and yet they're seeing what's happening on TV, and that's, I think, what's motivating most voters that I've been talking to up here have mentioned the border in some form. Granted, I've been at more Republican events, frankly, because President Biden hasn't been running. But I think overall, that's really interesting, the fact that, you know, New Hampshire is nowhere near it, and that's what voters are concerned about. Right. Because they're not just looking at local issues, they're looking at what's happening, and they're worried about national security and foreign policy type issues. Right.
No, it's fascinating. Kate, really quickly, give us a weather update from the ground. Weather as a big part of turnout, which is a big part of these primaries. What's it like there on the ground in New Hampshire?
It's actually not too bad. I am complaining a lot because it's winter and I very much dislike the cold. But I will say that it's mid-30s here. There might be a little bit of snow tonight, but it's after the polls close. So as far as it goes, you know, today is pretty par for the course. And by New England standards, it's a pretty mild day. So, you know, we were talking about Iowa last week as really being so cold that it affected turnout. But New Hampshire, that doesn't really seem to be the case. It's a pretty nice day out. It's not the sunniest or the most beautiful, but it's pretty warm. It's pretty mild here.
All right. Kate Martell, national politics reporter for The Hill, on the ground in New Hampshire. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And we'll see you all next hour with another update on America's Vote 2024.